It's just me, and I don't have a formal time being a so I'm gonna shake my fist if it gets too long. Oh, sure. 5 more minutes. Okay.
We are live for your sound. Where is that? Still at work. Some people actually work. They're watching baseball. Oh, that's true. That's true. Laying out. Who's it? Well, the Eagles were at 5-1.
We were just talking about time I'd like to not be doing that. Yeah.
Yeah, but you have the past where you have to find out. We get points for that. I think sure.
Yeah, I got this, Mary Henry from the League of Women Voters sent this out to all the lead people. That's how I found out about it.
Good,
Yeah.
yeah.
So I would say, once we get maybe into like the sense of teamwork, kind of look at the questions, see what ones are really priority,
Sure.
and then go from there.
Okay, that sounds good.
All right,
So we're good to go.
I'll be listening right out there.
Okay, and is this like gonna be on? Okay, okay. And sorry, will you let me know when it's all good to go? Perfect, thank you. Okay, all right. Good evening, everybody, and welcome to our 2022 Appellate Judicial Candidate Forum. I'm Rosalind Bienvenu. I'm an appellate attorney at Durham, Pittard, and Spalding in Santa Fe, and I'm the chair of the appellate practice section. So I just want to start by saying thank you to all of our New Mexico Supreme Court and Court of Appeal candidates for joining us tonight. I know you're all very busy, especially in the run-up to the election, and we definitely appreciate you giving the opportunity to the bar, everyone here, everyone watching online, and the public to learn a little bit more about you and hear a little bit more about your views. And thank you also to the State Bar Member Services and the rest of the Appellate Practice Section board for helping put this event together. So to get started, I'm going to start by asking each of the candidates to introduce themselves briefly and if possible in about 2 minutes each. And I was just saying that I have no way to enforce the 2-minute time limit, but if you could try to stick with the 2 minutes, that'd be wonderful. So let's start with the candidates for the Court of Appeals Position 1, starting with Judge Gerald Baca.
Oh, you're so sorry. I'm supposed to be sharing.
All right, well, thank you very much for allowing us to be here and for hosting this forum. I really appreciate it. I appreciate the fact that the appellate practice section of the bar has given us this opportunity to introduce ourselves to those practitioners who basically specialize in the area of appellate practice, and to those others who are online and here to get to know a little bit about us. And so at this point, let me go ahead and start. I am Gerald Baca. I'm currently a judge on the New Mexico Court of Appeals. I was appointed by Governor Grisham, Juan Grisham, in April of 2021. I have been there a little bit over a year now. I was born and raised in Mora and San Miguel counties, and primarily lived in Las Vegas. I come from rural northeastern New Mexico. My family were mostly ranchers and educators there in that area. I'm married. I've been married for over 38 years. I have 2 adult children and 3 grandchildren of mixed race. And so I've been a member of the New Mexico Bar for 35 years. I actually got sworn in as a lawyer in 1987, October of 1987. So I've been at this for a while. And during that time, I've been a prosecutor for 6 years, 2 years, almost 2 years in Santa Fe in the 1st Judicial District. Then for 4 years in Las Vegas, the 4th Judicial District, leaving that office as the Chief Deputy District Attorney. Following that, I was in private practice as a solo practitioner, doing a lot of criminal defense work, all the way from misdemeanors all the way up to capital crimes throughout the state of New Mexico for almost 20 years, but also doing the kind of work that all small town lawyers do. The land disputes, the wills, car accident cases, slip and fall cases, divorces, custody. In Las Vegas, I also did, because we have a state hospital there, I did involuntary commitment hearing cases, also did a number of abuse neglect cases, and so just saw a great variety of cases during that time as a private practitioner. I was fortunate that I got appointed to be a district court judge in the 4th Judicial District, which is San Miguel, Mora, and Guadalupe counties, and stayed in that position for about 16 months. And just like now, where we have to run after your appointment, I wasn't fortunate enough to win my election, and so I had to go back into private practice for a period of time. But then another position opened up about 4 or 5 years later, and I applied again and was recommended by the Judicial Nominating Commission, this time to, the first time I was appointed, it was a Democratic governor, and then the second time I was appointed was a Republican governor, and got appointed and stayed there for a total of a little over 9 years, and left the bench to go on to the Court of Appeals bench as the chief judge of the Judicial District. And so that's a little bit about me. The things I do when I'm not a judge or a lawyer is I'm a sports official. And I spend a lot of time doing that so that I'm connected with the youth in our communities. I've been doing that for, I believe, nearly 30 years. And so I do, of course, the major sports, baseball, basketball, and football, but I also do soccer and wrestling. And so I really enjoy that. I love it. And unfortunately now, because of the campaign, I'm not calling football or soccer, but I'm really anxious for the campaign to be over and to be able to get back on the court. And so with that, thank you for the opportunity to introduce myself.
Thank you. Okay, let's move to Barbara Johnson.
Thank you. My name is Barbara Johnson. I am the Republican candidate running for position 1 on the New Mexico Court of Appeals. Thank you, Appellate Section, for putting this together and giving us this opportunity. I consider you people a little intimidating because you are the ones I hunt for when things go wrong, and you're all so busy. It's amazing to me. But a little about myself personally. I've been married to the same man for 52 years. We were very young when we got married. Grew up well together. We have 2 adult children, both independent, self-sufficient, thank you, God. And both are also attorneys. And they have produced 5 gorgeous, brilliant grandchildren for my pleasure. And I practice family law. I knew I wanted to be a family law practitioner before I entered law school because I've wanted to be a lawyer and a judge since I was 12. So I've worked very close to the law as everything from a night word processor at a big firm up to a paralegal for a senior law lawyer. Family law is a very broad practice, and thus I have learned very much more about law than I ever expected I would, leaving law school and wanting to do family law. I've been practicing now for 34 years. I worked for the first 5 years for Betty Reed. I hunted out one of the most experienced, feared family law attorneys, and had to work free for a while to convince her she couldn't live without me, but it was well worth it. She was an excellent instructor. I forgot to press my start button. And then have been on my own since then. She and I shared offices and everything until she retired. As my son, who is my associate, says, "Mom, I don't know if you can do this. You've never had a boss." And he's right. I haven't. Betty and I were kind of partners. I've not had a boss, but I consider the district court judges the boss of every one of my cases, and the Court of Appeals to make sure that I did it right down there, and then the Supremes to keep me in line. So I'm not really worried about working for the state, and I'm honored to be running. I'm honored to meet Judge Baca for the first time and Ms. Cooper for the first time personally. And again, thank you very much for having us.
Thank you. And next up is Sophie Cooper.
Okay, good afternoon and almost good evening. My name is Sophie Cooper. I'm originally from New York. I went to college at University of Chicago and studied economics. I wanted to have my own business. I moved to New Mexico and had an Indian jewelry business for 10 or 12 years. I love New Mexico. The sunshine is what made me move here, but I've come to really love the lifestyle here. Very family oriented, and that's what I like. I went to law school at American University in Washington. My third year, I came back as a visiting student, primarily because my boyfriend, my fiance, we were never legally married, is from here. He's from Mariano Lake, New Mexico. He's Navajo, and I missed him a lot. So I came back, and my first job was for Judge Harris Hartz on the Court of Appeals. He told me, "You should apply to the public defender." I came from an upper middle class background, no lawyers in the family, no one ever in any criminal trouble. I didn't even know what a public defender was. But I started my career with the public defender soon after my clerkship ended. I did it for 27 years. I loved it. I never burned out. I retired basically because I wanted the joy of the retirement income that I had worked for, and I got me a job at the Pueblo of Isleta as their public defender, and I thoroughly enjoy my job. I find myself running on the Libertarian ticket for the Court of Appeals. I really believe in individual freedom. I decided to put my action where my mouth usually is, and I made that decision. So thank you, and I'm just happy I'm here. Thanks.
Thank you. Okay, so now we'll move to the candidates for Court of Appeals Position 2, starting with Judge Catherine Ray.
Good afternoon. My name is Catherine Ray. I've been a judge on the Court of Appeals for about a year doing that work. And I'm so happy to be here with all of you this afternoon and with my fellow candidates. I graduated from the University of New Mexico School of Law, but not before getting an undergraduate theater degree in stage management from Penn State University. My mom's a nurse and my dad was in the military. We lived all over. When they decided to settle in Albuquerque, we all followed suit. I came out here to go to law school. After law school, I clerked in the Court of Appeals for 2 years. I clerked at the U.S. District Court for 2 years. And then in my practice, I divided it into two pieces. I partially was a contract staff attorney in the 2nd Judicial Criminal Division so that I could keep my hands and my head in criminal law. working with the judges, working inside the court, helping keep the court going. And I also had a small civil practice. I did appellate law and practiced in the court where I now sit. And as well as the New Mexico Supreme Court in the 10th Circuit. And I also did contract legal writing for a number of other lawyers and trial work myself. I've been married for 22 years. I have 2 children who are happily teenagers now. And I'm looking forward to talking about the issues that have been set out for us this evening. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, and next up, Gertrude Lee.
Thank you. Gertrude Lee Michelin, I was born in Shiprock, New Mexico, and I grew up in Kirtland, New Mexico. I currently live in Farmington, so I'm a Four Corners girl, Broncos, for anyone out there. And when I grew up, I never thought that I would be running for Court of Appeals or position in higher office. It just wasn't on the radar. I grew up in Kirtland. It's along the river there, and people think of Kirtland, you think of the little towns on the highway and the nice places on the river. I grew up over in the Sandy area by the compost and dump station in a trailer with my family. And to watch my family aspire to higher education, my dad and my mom didn't get higher than a high school education, but they persevered and they did the best they could. My dad became a business owner in the Farmington area. He later became a tribal advocate on the Navajo Nation. And my parents instilled in me the importance of higher education and pushing yourself and serving your community and thinking about the duty that you owe to your community. And so one of my brothers was I have a big family, 4 older brothers, a twin sister, 2 older sisters, and a half brother and half sister who are younger than me. And one of my brothers graduated from law school the same year I was graduating from high school. And I learned from a very young age that the law was in me, as well as my family. And I carry that sense of duty. I've been an attorney for over 12 years. I have devoted my legal career to public service. I was a prosecutor in McKinley County and San Juan County, and I was a chief prosecutor of the Navajo Nation for several years, where I managed 10 legal offices over the land mass of the size of West Virginia, with several dozen legal staff. And it wasn't just criminal work. We did also child abuse and neglect, and worked with many different federal, state, and tribal partners. Sorry about that. I went over. Thank you very much for having me.
Thank you. Okay, next up is Stephen Curtis.
Good afternoon. Thank you for hosting this. And I was born in Brooklyn, New York. My parents moved to a small town in Nebraska when I was 3. I grew up there. It was a Midwestern way of life, and growing up in a small town, and it was fun. I went to a Northwestern University for my engineering degree, and I worked for 4 years, and then went to University of Virginia for my law degree. And when I graduated, I was looking for some place that was warm, sunny, and dry, because Virginia tended to wash out my tennis games in the afternoon. So I was looking for and a place to ski. And I looked on the map and I said, I think Albuquerque is where I'm going. So I interviewed out here, and I moved out here in 1978. So I've been practicing for 44 years. It's mostly a civil practice, commercial litigation, and some transactional work as well. Early on in college, I thought that I was a liberal. And when the war ended, I realized I was not a liberal. It was just those were the guys who were opposed to the war, as I was. When the war ended, I realized I had been a libertarian all along. And I ran for Congress in 1984, ran against the incumbent, Manuel Lujan, and then I ran for Court of Appeals 2 years ago, and now here I am back again, and I hope that I can bring a different perspective to the Court of Appeals. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, so moving to the candidates for Supreme Court Position 1, starting with Justice Julie Vargas.
Thank you, Rosalind. Thank you to the Appellate Practice Group, as well as the State Bar in Morgan for putting on this forum. I'm Julie Vargas. I am your current justice on the New Mexico Supreme Court. For those of you who don't know me, I was born and raised here in Albuquerque, in Old Town, where I still live. I went away for a little while to college. I went to Brown in Rhode Island, and then had realized while I was there that I really needed to get back to New Mexico. This is where I belong. So I came back to New Mexico, and I went to the University of New Mexico School of Law, graduated in 1993, and I am starting my 30th year as a member of this bar. Since graduating, I spent 23 years practicing commercial and business litigation right here in Albuquerque, representing mostly individuals and New Mexico small businesses. In 2016, I decided that I aspired to be a member of the Court of Appeals, so I applied for the position. I was vetted by the Judicial Nominating Commission and found to be qualified, but I didn't get the appointment. So I went ahead and ran for that position and won the position, and then spent 4 years on the Court of Appeals deciding, as we know, every kind of case the Court of Appeals decides, from criminal to civil to administrative to CYFD child welfare cases. 2 years ago, the governor appointed me to the Supreme Court, where I've been since January of 2021, both hearing cases that the court hears, as well as doing all the administrative work of the court to administer the courts of New Mexico. And I'm really happy to be here. I would like to continue with my job, so thank you.
Thank you. Okay, next up is Thomas Montoya.
Thank you very much. My name is Tom Montoya. I very respectfully request your vote for me, for Tom Montoya, for the New Mexico Supreme Court. I have a website where you can find a whole lot about me, my qualifications, background, and reasons for wanting to be on the Supreme Court. That's tommontoya.com, tommontoya.com. I'm born and raised here in New Mexico. My family actually in New Mexico goes back 400 years. I come from a family of 8, 6 children, and the values we learned was trust and faith in God, devotion to family, devotion to work, good, honest, hard work, self-responsibility, self-reliance. And those are the values that I still continue to adhere to. I have been also nominated by the Judicial Nominating Commission 3 times for different positions on the district court. I have been appointed by the Supreme Court to chair the committee that came up with all of our statewide rules on domestic relations and domestic violence law. And I have a great interest in the administration of justice. I have personally written, lobbied, testified over 50 times in the legislature for enacted family law legislation. There's more, as I said, on the website, possibly more information as we go along. I'm turning off my clock.
Thank you very much. Okay, and last up we have our candidates, well, our candidate for Supreme Court position number 2, Justice Brianna Zamora.
Thank you. Good evening, everyone. My name is Brianna Zamora. I'm a justice on the New Mexico Supreme Court, and I want to let you know that it's been the honor of my professional life to serve you, not only in the Supreme Court, but at every level of the judiciary. I was born, raised, and publicly educated here in New Mexico, and I'm raising my 2 kiddos here. I have a deep love for this state and serving my community. And I believe what's required of a Supreme Court justice is experience. I have served at every level, like I said, at the judiciary. I started at Metro Court. I worked my way up to District Court, worked my way up to the Court of Appeals, and I finally made my way to the Supreme Court. I've presided in over 20,000 cases, and I've had nearly 150 jury trials in my career. Yes, we are very busy at the District Court. As an attorney, I litigated civil cases, criminal cases, and I represented abused and neglected children as their guardian ad litem. I've also spent time, in addition to my day-to-day docket, as a treatment court judge. I participated in drug court. I went to St. Martin's Homeless Shelter and presided over homeless court. And I went out to our local schools and held live court so that our youth would understand why they should not drink and drive. I believe experience matters, particularly in the Supreme Court, because we have the responsibility of overseeing every single court beneath us in this state. And someone who has worked at every court beneath the Supreme Court is the right person for this job. As you know, I've served New Mexico with integrity, honesty, and fairness, and I want to keep serving you on the Supreme Court. Again, my name's Brianna Zamora, and I ask for your vote and support. Thank you.
Thank you. And I'll just note that Carrie Morris, who's also running for Supreme Court position 2, was unable to be here tonight. Okay, so now we're going to move into some questions. I'm going to start with a few more general questions that I'll pose to everyone up here, and so we'll just go in turn again. And again, I would ask that the answers be around 2 minutes or less if possible. So let's start with, why do you want to be a judge on the court? How have your education, training, professional experience, and interests, some of which we've heard a little bit about, prepared you to serve on the court? And what distinguishes you from other persons who have sought or held the position? And so let's go back to the candidates for Court of Appeals Position 1, and we'll go down the line again. So starting with Judge Baca.
Well, thank you for the question. I want to be the reason I want to continue to be on the Court of Appeals is because I, as I mentioned earlier, come from a family of educators and ranchers who taught me the value of hard work and the value of helping your community and serving your community. And so I've had that as my foundation as I grew up. While going to Highlands University, I was coaching at the local high schools. I was also refereeing at that time. And I was involved with my community. And as I was in private practice, I continued to coach youth sports, to referee. I was a board member for Big Brothers Big Sisters, involved with Kiwanis Club, and there's a number of things associated with giving back to my community. And so as I gained more and more experience in my profession, the law, I believe that I was at a point in my life where I needed to give back more. And one way to give back more was by being a judge. And I served, as I said, for over 9 years as a district court judge, and now for over a year as a Court of Appeals judge. And so with that, I think that I'm able to sit and listen to cases that have impact, not just as a district court judge in my judicial district, but on a statewide basis. And I think my experience in the vast amount of cases that I've done in all areas of law helped me to be able to perform that job. And so I think that's basically why I want to be on the court, continue to be on the court, and hopefully you all will look at my qualifications and see that I should remain there. Thank you.
Thank you. And next we'll hear from Barbara Johnson.
You want me to answer the same question?
Yes, everyone will answer this one, yeah.
Okay.
Then we'll
Just
mix it
wanted
up.
to make sure I
Yes.
didn't get to choose, because I have some good ones I like. Okay, I'll talk about why first I want to be a judge on the court. I have wanted to be a lawyer and a judge since I was 12 years old. I'll try to shorten this story a lot, even though it's longer than 2 minutes. When I was 12, my daddy had to take care of me for one day. I don't know why. He was a maintenance man in a federal building. We went to his job. He had to go to the basement to work on the boiler, said it wasn't safe for me. So he was going to put me somewhere in the building and I was to wait for him. So he set me in a courtroom and said, don't talk, don't move, just sit there till I come back. And I did. I grew up in Louisiana in the 1950s. It was a very tense time in Louisiana in the South. And for the first time, I experienced the resolution of a dispute with no violence. No one got hurt. There was no force used anywhere. People got all dressed up, went to a beautiful building, paid attention to the judge. Most importantly to me, they shook hands before they started their case. And when the case was over, they shook hands again and everybody left in peace. When my daddy came to get me, he said, "You have a good time?" I said, "I had a great time, and that's what I'm going to do when I grow up." And he said, "Oh, honey, you can't do that. You're a girl." Because Southern women are not lawyers. They do not argue all day. So for the rest of my time I was at home, I argued with my daddy about girls being lawyers. I've worked very hard to become a lawyer, and we chose New Mexico to come here, finish our educations, and pursue our careers. And I would like now to change that career to more service of all of the citizens of New Mexico.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. Okay, next we'll hear from Sophie Cooper.
For me, the reason I want to be a judge is I was really alarmed at the usurpation of power by the executive branch of government in the state during the COVID crisis and continuing to today. And I decided that, for the first time, I felt like the government was really interfering in my life, my lifestyle, my personal choices. And I wanted to do something about it. I wanted a forum to speak about it. I believe, we have 3 branches of government, and those are equal branches. The judiciary is an important branch, and it serves as a check on the other branches. To use emergency powers to continue into today, it started with COVID. I can understand a short emergency. I can't understand where we're coming into 3 years. The thing that really bothered me is when the governor used the Riot Control Act that was passed in the 60s and meant for insurrections and riots to close the roads to Gallup, New Mexico. I have a lot of relatives out there. Some of them came to my house. My brother-in-law served in Vietnam, and he said, "I didn't do anything wrong. How come I'm locked down?" That's where I made my mind up to start speaking out, to make a donation to the Libertarian Party and to see what I could do. It interfered in people's religious beliefs, and it seemed like there was never a real close re-examination of the policies and what they had produced. Now there is, but it's late, and there have been a lot of negative effects. I'm well educated. I've had a lot of different life experiences, and I'm a good writer. I've done a lot of writing. I do a lot of listening. I do a lot of arguing for my side in criminal cases. I have to respond to the other side, and I listen to it. And I have an open mind, and I'm just kind of anxious to do something about the way I see things changing, because I really value my lifestyle and I value personal freedom. That's why I want to be a judge.
Thank you. Okay, next we have Judge Ray.
I decided I wanted to be a judge on the Court of Appeals specifically when I clerked in this court. When I clerked here, I worked for a judge who had an ethic of moving through cases quickly, efficiently, thoroughly. And in those 2 years that I spent there, I came to love the pace. I came to love the breadth of legal issues that the court addressed. And when I left, I decided there were a bunch of things I needed to learn how to do so I could be ready to come back. And so I went to the federal district court to learn how trials work, to learn how discovery works from the inside, how courts work from the inside at the district court level. When I left the district court, I started my own little practice so I could learn what I wanted to learn and be ready for what I wanted to do. I got involved with the Second Judicial so that I could learn how that district court worked, how that court connected to the Court of Appeals, how criminal cases function, how they move through the court, while at the same time having my civil practice where I could continue to get practice with legal writing, with complex civil issues, helping with civil trial work, and doing appeals in all of the appeals courts that I could get cases to practice in. So I constructed this career to be ready to come back to the Court of Appeals and handle the extremely broad array of issues that come before our court, and to be able to handle them primarily in writing. The Court of Appeals is a writing court. We issue written opinions, and so I spent those almost 15 years in practicing those writing skills so that, again, I would be ready to come back. My parents taught me about service. They taught me about hard work. And this, I feel, is the place where I can do the most service and the most good with the skills that I have.
Great, thank you. Okay, and next we have Gertrude Lee.
Yes, so I mentioned before how I have devoted my legal career to public service. I've done that as a trial attorney, as a prosecutor working in rural New Mexico. And I think that goes into what makes me unique for this position as well. A number of the judges who are currently sitting and who are running are primarily from the Albuquerque and the Santa Fe corridor. We have a number of judges from past and present from other areas of New Mexico, but we don't really have anyone from northwestern New Mexico. And when you look at the array of judges, it's heavily in the metro area, and I think that a rural voice would be a benefit to add that perspective. Also, there's never been a Native American on the Court of Appeals or the Supreme Court in the state of New Mexico. When we did the research to go through that, I was surprised. And when I go into court as a trial attorney, I am routinely, the only brown or Native American face that I see. And to run for this position and to speak my language and to get out there and run, I think it's important to show other young attorneys who may not have thought about running for this type of position or thinking that it's beyond them, to know that it is within reach. And I think that's a unique perspective that I can bring. Someone who was born and raised in New Mexico, practice law in rural New Mexico, and also in the tribal courts and tribal communities. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, and next up is Stephen Curtis.
After practicing for as long as I have, I feel it's time to give back to the community, and I'd like to be a judge. I'd like to do that as a judge. And I'm really focused on the issues of freedom. I think that the Bill of Rights, particularly the First and Second and Fourth Amendments, need someone to support them. I think they have been under attack in ways that could not be dreamed of 10 years ago. Most recently, we've got the entire government shutting down people's rights. And the Bill of Rights and the Constitution is there to protect people's rights against the government. And that's my focus. I think that this has not been given as much attention as is appropriate to protect the civil rights of the people in this country. I think if we don't step up and start protecting those rights, they will disappear. And that's my focus, and my passion is freedom. And all you got to do is apply the Constitution and the Bill of Rights, and you get the right answers. And I think our elected servants have not done that. And I would like to be a voice on the Court of Appeals to raise those issues and try to get the court to focus more on those, to stop some of the violations of the civil rights that have been taking place in the last, especially the last couple of years.
Thank you. And next up, Justice Vargas.
Thank you, Rosalind. I've spent most of my career, and especially my time as a lawyer, doing what I could to improve the legal system. I spent about 20 years mentoring lawyers with their ethical dilemmas to try and make sure that they did right by their clients and provided the service that their clients were entitled to and expected. I spent years on the disciplinary board, recommending discipline to the lawyers who fell short of that obligation. It was very important to me as a lawyer to make sure that the lawyers who were out in our community practicing were serving their community and helping their community. And I want to continue that work on the Supreme Court as a judge. And as being on the Supreme Court, serving on the Supreme Court is an opportunity to make a significant impact. Not only do we make an impact in the opinions that we write on our voting rights, our water rights, our constitutional rights, the court also in its administrative function has a significant impact on the day-to-day lives of our fellow New Mexicans. A couple of examples that just come into my mind are the eviction diversion program that was set up when COVID came into place, and evictions were halted for almost 2 years. Rather than flood the courts with evictions, the court worked on creating an eviction diversion program that assisted in getting government money both to tenants and landlords so that we did not have an overflow of homelessness of people who were evicted from their homes after the eviction moratorium was lifted. One of the other things the court has really worked hard on, and I think we want to continue to work hard on over the next several years, are virtual appearances and the ability of litigants to appear virtually in court and attorneys to appear virtually, which really assists with access to justice issues. It allows attorneys in the metro area to help clients who might not be able to come to court, who might not be in the metro area. Those lawyers can help clients in other places. It also assists with clients not having to travel to go to court, where they might not be able to get childcare, they might not have transportation. They can, take a 15-minute break from their job and on their phone do a hearing. So these are the kinds of things that the court has been able to do to help our New Mexico communities over the last couple of years, and I hope to continue with that work. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, and next up is Tom Montoya.
Thank you. Why do I want to be a judge or a justice? Great question. I love the law. I do. I love our system when it works at its best, where people have a dispute, and rather than pulling out and getting in a fight, pulling out weapons, they take their dispute to a judge who resolves their dispute for them. And again, when it works at its best, both sides accept that decision. That's what we agree to do in our society. And I love those principles in our system. I love to write. I spend a lot of time writing. I like the writing process. I have, my writings have been recognized by the Court of Appeals as authoritative in 3 different cases. Writing is something that I just aspire to do, and I like to do that. In my career of 41 years, I have devoted myself to the improvement in administration of the law. And with the legislation I spoke of, chairing the committees I spoke of, and being part of committees that advance the administration of the law, it can be improved a great deal. We know that crime is a big issue right now that is before the courts and before the public. I hardly go anywhere without hearing something about crime. The courts enforce those laws. That's what I want to do.
Thank you. Okay, and finally, we have Justice Samora.
Thank you. So my dad always tells me he's very humble man. He's like, I just never thought I would have a child who would be a judge. He's like, I'm very proud of me. And everyone who meets him knows that. So I'm the first lawyer, the first judge, and now the first justice in my family. I may have been a late start at wanting to be a judge because I actually didn't realize that it would even be something I was interested in. Until towards the end of law school and the beginning of my career, I started practicing at Metro Court, and I would sit in the courtrooms. They made us observe them, and some courtrooms I felt like, wow, that judge really gave the time and attention that each case deserves, even though they are misdemeanors and not, murder charges. It doesn't matter. It was very important to that person. And then other courtrooms were different. And I really felt, and I still to this day do, hold the belief that every case matters and you need to give the time and attention to each case, whether it's a traffic case or whether it's an appeal up on the Supreme Court. Each case deserves the time and attention it deserves. I've stood by that principle my entire time as a judge, and it's really kind of what's driven me to continue my judicial service. And I absolutely love it. There's not a day I wake up and think, gosh, I wish I were something else. I wake up ready to work hard for the people of this state and really make some changes. The experience that makes me uniquely qualified, you have a great court right now. You have 5 justices with very different backgrounds, so we complement each other well. An area where I think distinguishes me is my decade as a criminal trial court judge. I know the inner workings of our criminal justice system, every single aspect of it. And I've been tasked with traveling throughout the state and really trying to make some changes in our criminal justice system, meeting with law enforcement, meeting with judges, meeting with DAs, and meeting with public defenders. And I'm proud of the accomplishments that we've made in only a year. We've started the first ever mental health commission, which brings every branch of government together to work on improving our behavioral health system. And finally, we've also made some changes in Bernalillo County and Santa Fe County to help keep officers on the street as opposed to sitting in a courtroom through a long docket when it may not be necessary. And in fact, what I'm most proud of is a pilot project here in Bernalillo County that has cut the number of preliminary hearings set in half. That means you have law enforcement on the streets 50% more than you did before this project was initiated. So I think I have the judicial background, the legal experience, appellate experience in every area of the law to continue serving on the Supreme Court.
Thank you. Okay, I'm going to ask one more question to everybody, and then I'll move into some individual questions. So this one is, what is the biggest issue facing the judiciary in New Mexico, and what do you plan to do to address it as a member of the court? If you had the power to change one thing about the court on your own, what would that thing be? And this time, can we start with Justice Samora, and we'll go back this direction.
We have a lot of challenges in our court system, and we're working hard every day to address them. The one thing I would change, and it was really brought to light during COVID, is improving broadband access, particularly for our smaller communities and our tribal communities, to make sure that when we have virtual hearings, all individuals can appear, or when they have transportation issues, we are making virtual hearings a viable option. If I could wave a magic wand, I would create hubs in which we're close to some of these communities, like in libraries or grocery stores or things of that nature, where people could appear for court and have available broadband access to do so in a meaningful way.
Thank you. Okay, and now Tom Montoya.
From the practitioner's point of view, it was a really big challenge during COVID when basically the courts were shut down. And people, I can't tell you as a practitioner how important it is for those who have a dispute to have that dispute resolved quickly, fairly. They absolutely hate to have a suit, if that's what it is, or their case, if they're a defendant, hanging over their heads and waiting and waiting and waiting. This was not the fault of the court system. Obviously, it was the COVID procedures, but that is a challenge. One of the wonderful things that came out of that challenge is the virtual hearings. Now, but the virtual hearings cannot be used whenever there is witness testimony, because it's just so important for the tribunal, the judge, the jury, to see the witnesses testify, their demeanor, how they do it. But the virtual hearings can be made permanent, in my view, for all procedural matters, and it is a boon to clients because it saves them money. Just traveling down to the courthouse, whether it's local or cross state, what we practice in 4 corners of our state. So hours and hours to go to a hearing that it just doesn't need to be in person. Those are some of the challenges, and those are some of the benefits.
Thank you. And Justice Vargas.
So I think there are 2 big issues facing the judiciary right now, and we've touched on both of them. One is the availability of services in criminal cases, and that's getting to Justice Zamora's mental and behavioral health issues. We have criminal judges who are hearing cases who have clients who clearly need mental health and behavioral health services. And here in New Mexico, we just don't have anywhere to send them or to put them. We are unable to help them in the way that we would like to be able to help them in order to make the system effective and make the circumstances effective. So that's one of the issues. The other issue is one that I talked about, which was access to legal services, which is mostly on the civil side. We have so many cases, and so many of our civil judges will talk about how it's rare for them to have a civil case where both sides are represented by counsel. So, you know, it's really tough when you have to go to court to resolve a civil matter, but you don't have any representation and you can't afford representation. So if I got to wave my magic wand and do one thing to improve the judiciary or the judicial system, it would be to require appointment of counsel for civil cases, foreclosures, all matters of civil cases. I think it results in fairer outcomes. It would be the case matters would be more pointed and less kind of broad, and the results would be better. I know it's very pie in the sky. I know Justice Bacon is working very hard to move us closer to that goal with her Access to Justice project. But that's, you know, if I could wave my magic wand, that's what I would do.
Thank you. Okay, Stephen Curtis.
I think the most critical thing that needs to get done is to focus the courts on protecting our freedoms. And that starts with the Bill of Rights and the Constitution. And as I said earlier, I think that the courts have not given enough deference to the principles set out in those documents, the Constitution and the Bill of Rights. There's a reason. There's a reason why we have the First Amendment and the Second Amendment and the Fourth Amendment. And the courts did not apply properly, I think, those principles when deciding cases, especially in the last several years. For example, we had an emergency law that was utilized to shut down the economy, to shut down churches, to shut down gun dealers, right? That impacts the right to worship, the right to congregate, the right to buy weapons to protect yourself. And we've still got this emergency law declaration in effect. An emergency doesn't last for 3 years. we've gone way past 2 years now, and emergency may last several months, and then it's time for somebody else to make a decision. The legislature should have gotten involved, and the courts, I think, should have stopped the emergency declaration from being used after a certain point in time. So I think that's the biggest thing that I think needs to get done is to go back to the standard that was set by our founding fathers. They came up with some amazing governmental structure and the protections for personal freedoms. And I think the courts need to get back to that, and that's what I would advocate if I'm on the Court of Appeals.
Thank you. Okay, and Gertrude Lee.
Based upon my experience campaigning around the state, listening to the different people, the public who want to be educated about the courts and listen to them actively, the biggest issues that I hear coming out from the public is number one, crime. So I think that what the courts could do and what I would like to see is maybe seeing some more public engagement about what the court's role is in the process of the criminal justice system and how we can open up so that we can hear more from the public about these criminal law issues. Because as we know, we have rules committees, we've got rules of criminal procedure, and particularly I constantly hear over and over about catch and release, and having to explain what all of that is without making any sort of decision or overarching policy statement about it. I think that the people of New Mexico would appreciate hearing from the judiciary how the judiciary is working to tackle that issue, because it's number one. As I'm out there, it's pretty much number one that people bring that up. Number two is, I think, confidence in the justice system. And politics is seeping into every single aspect of our life, even coming out with a bottle, I'm sure there's some folks who are like, why are they using bottles? They should be using aluminum. Everything that we do is so politicized these days. And I think that the judiciary, the judiciary is under a microscope for a reason. And I think that making fair, impartial decisions is forefront of that. And that's certainly what I would intend to do as a judge. If I could change anything, if I had a magic wand, I'd have to be in the Supreme Court, but I would get rid of the masks in the courtroom. We have been campaigning around the state, filled in auditoriums around people, close distance. And when I go to work, and into the trial courts, I see jurors and judges and lawyers inside of a courtroom. But the second we step outside in the hallway, we can take them off. I really would like to see that change.
Thank you. And Judge Ray.
I agree that access to justice is probably the biggest issue facing the judiciary. And I think access divides up into a couple of categories. We have physical access, and we have legal access in terms of having enough lawyers to address all of the problems. And the Supreme Court has its initiatives and the things that it's doing to try to address those issues. I think transparency is also an access to justice issue, because people don't understand the judiciary, what it does, how it works, how the different levels work. I agree with Ms. Lee, because I've been carrying around a little flow chart for people so that I can locate our court in the middle and explain what we do in comparison to the other courts, because I want people to understand what it is that the Court of Appeals does. So I think all of those things fall under access to justice. What I plan to do about it involves more what the Court of Appeals does. Access to justice also includes access to timely justice. And as the junior judge on the Court of Appeals right now, what I can do is open a case file, review the case file thoroughly, all the aspects of it, consider the arguments, do the research, write the opinion, close the file, and open the next one. I can do the work of the court, and I can do it efficiently to get people the answers that they need. if I had the last part of the question, I wasn't sure if it was a magic wand kind of question or if it was a practically, what would you do if you really were? So my magic wand version answer has to do with, again, how our court functions. And I think I would love there to be a way where when cases come in, we could very quickly and easily identify whether it is a case that needs to be decided immediately, sort of the time track that the case needed. Right now, there are certain programs that can instigate a faster review process, usually involving children. But if we could have a magic triage system that told us the order to decide cases, that would be my magic wand solution, or my magic wand wish today. And then the other thing, but what I think that, I want to make sure I get it right. If I could do one thing on my own, it would be to encourage everybody and the members of the bar to allow the changes that the Court of Appeals is slowly working on to address time to disposition issues to work, to give us some time to let us have these changes evolve so we can see and pinpoint better what programs and initiatives are and aren't working before we change our minds and decide to try something else, because I think the court is moving in the right direction.
Thank you. Okay, and Sophie Cooper.
I agree with everything everyone else has said. I think those are all problems with the judiciary, and I heard some good ways of looking at it and solutions. I'm going to just mention a few things that concern me about the judiciary. I felt like the COVID cases, the executive order cases that went to the Supreme Court of New Mexico, they went mostly to the Supreme Court and not the Court of Appeals. I felt like the court set out to find a way to affirm the governor. I felt like there wasn't really a fair hearing given to the issues that were raised. And there were restaurants that filed suit. There were small businesses. There were some churches in New Mexico. The U.S. Supreme Court finally stood up for the freedom of religion and went back to the way things were before an important case in 1990. It went back to strict scrutiny of laws that affect religion and a compelling interest. And it kind of restored our religious freedom in the state. The state had to follow suit. So the role of the court really concerns me. Its role, I believe, is to protect our freedoms and affirm the Bill of Rights. I agree with Mr. Curtis. The other thing that bothers me is sometimes the quality of lawyering in the state, particularly in some of the outlying areas, and particularly among public defenders and prosecutors. I can see that when I see docketing statements, and that's a very important introduction to the Court of Appeals about what your appeal is about. And the reason I know about the quality and sometimes the poor quality of docketing statements is I spent about 2 years doing habeas work, post-conviction work, looking at issues of ineffective assistance of counsel. I had many positions at the public defender, a managing attorney. I was working briefly in Aztec, New Mexico, and I worked a lot of cases in Roswell when the caseloads were overwhelming. So I don't know what the answer is to that. Part of it is financial, to encourage more lawyers to practice in those areas. I'm not really sure of all the answers. One thing I learned at the Pueblo of Isleta, I thought you can't teach an old dog new tricks, but I started that after 27 years at the public defender. I have a much smaller caseload, and with it, I provide much better representation than I did at any other time in my career. So that's another area I think where the Court of Appeals can be helpful, because if the issues are not set out right, that affects how that appeal goes, because the judges focus on the issues that are brought before them. There are lots of rules about issues that are not raised in the trial level and not raised to the Court of Appeals. So that's an issue for me.
Thank you. Okay, and Barbara Johnson.
Thank you, ma'am. The biggest issue, as I campaign and even as I'm representing clients going through personal cases of divorce and custody and paternity, I do a lot of educating to my clients and to the people I'm speaking to about the judiciary. It seems like the general public knows very little about this important branch of their government, and they feel like they have no way of finding out more about it. I don't think I'm one of those persons that's going to be very good at sitting in an ivory tower. I'm more of a people person. I believe we need to gain the trust of our citizens in our judicial branch. I believe we need to educate them. I think that our newspapers and media should cover more of what the judiciary is doing. I think we should go out into the community. I think we should be at the law school more. And I love working on Constitution Day in elementary school. Those kids are fascinating and very interested in the law. I don't think they get enough of it at present. So I think the biggest issue is gaining the trust of our citizens and serving those citizens and educating them. My one thing I would like is to expedite the appellate process. When I have an appeal, I mean, these people have already been through a terrible trial. It doesn't matter whether they won or lost. It's terrible in their life. And they need the final decision made as quickly as possible. I think triaging is wonderful. I had one appeal to the Court of Appeals that was decided in less than 6 months because it was a child-related matter. And we had an oral argument, we got a bench decision, and those people were very satisfied with their judiciary, both the winner and the loser, because they could move on with their lives. Thank you.
Thank you. And Judge Baca.
Well, thank you. I think the biggest issue, I see two of them, based on my experience with the courts, both as a practitioner and as a judge. I think the first one is the access to justice component for litigants who are self-represented. I agree with Justice Vargas that, when I first started the practice of law, you'd step into a courtroom, you'd see lawyers on both sides. Now, when I left the district court for the Court of Appeals, that wasn't true. More often than not, in the smaller cases that came before the court, you had self-represented litigants or pro se litigants on both sides. Or you would have one attorney on one side or a self-represented litigant on the other. And the issue with that is that self-represented litigants try as hard as they can to get up to speed, to be ready for their cases and to present the cases as best as they can, but they're just not on an equal footing with a trained lawyer. And that presents a challenge for the judge who's deciding that case to make sure that the judge isn't overreaching to assist one party or the other, and to be fair to both sides. And so it causes a lot of stress on the system. My thinking about that is that I know that the Supreme Court has done a number of things to try to address those issues. They have the Equity and Justice Commission that was put together, I believe, by Chief Justice Bacon. They're looking at those issues and ways to try to address the fact that self-represented litigants need assistance. There's no doubt. They just can't do it on their own. So they thought maybe about navigators to assist individuals to work through the system, not be their attorneys, not give them legal advice, but to assist them through navigating the procedural pathways to get their case heard and dealt with. Maybe more mandatory pro bono hours, which is, I know as a practitioner, that it's hard. You're trying to make a living, and then you have a mandatory amount of pro bono that you have to do, which is hard to squeeze in. And I imagine a number of practitioners probably put that off until the last minute and try to get it done. But we've got to be thinking about ways that we can get the self-represented litigant in the courtroom, get their cases heard, and get them resolved. The other issue that I guess the magic wand issue for me is on the criminal side. As a district court judge, I was a drug court judge for adults and for juveniles. And the issue for me as a drug court judge was the lack of resources so that I could get the defendants or participants the treatment they needed, the resources they needed to get back on their feet, housing, education, whatever they needed, because in drug court we treat the individual as a whole. We don't just focus on the issue of substance use, because if we do that, we're setting them up for failure. And so I just wish that I could magically come up with a lot of money to enable the state to fund the resources that are needed for these individuals with substance use disorders, mental health disorders, and homelessness. Because I think, as Ms. Lee talked about, crime, a function of homelessness, of substance use disorder, of mental health issues is crime. And if we can address those issues at the basic and fundamental, basis, I think we resolve most, if not all of that. So thank you.
Thank you. Okay, so now I'll ask a few questions to each position. So you don't get a break. I'll start with the Court of Appeals Position 1 candidates. Please describe the most difficult case you've encountered, either as a judge or as an attorney. What made it difficult and how did you handle it? So I'll start with Judge Baca.
The most difficult case I've had are a category of cases. And I think Ms. Johnson will agree with me that when you're dealing with issues involving children, be it a custody case or child welfare, abuse, neglect case, that those are the cases that keep you up at night. And you're wondering, after hearing all the facts from both sides and considering all the circumstances, what the right thing is to do for that child, what's in the best interest of that child. Those are the cases that, as I say, keep you up at night. You hope that based on your experience as a litigator, handling those types of cases, as a judge, handling those kinds of cases for many years, and with the representation of both parties, that you're making the right decision and that you're doing the right thing for that child and that family, in whether it's a custody case or an abuse neglect case. And so those are always the toughest cases for me, have been, and even now in the Court of Appeals, those cases, abuse neglect cases, custody cases, are given expedited disposition because they're so important and they have such an effect and impact on our communities and the families. And it's no different from when I was in the district court. Those are the cases that keep me up at night when I think about the facts, the circumstances, and what the best thing is to do for that child, so the child is safe and the family can move forward from the situation.
Thank you. Barbara Johnson.
Thank you, ma'am. Well, Judge Baca stole my answer, so I'll go to my second most difficult case, which was one involving military retirement versus military disability, because when you're working on a case like that, you think, okay, the guy laid his life on the line for his country, suffered a disability, was overseas, all of these terrible circumstances, and then there's wife, home with all the children, trying to make a decent living and taking care of them while worrying about husband overseas and having no daddy at home for the children. Trying to do that case was very difficult for a whole bunch of reasons, not just the circumstances. Also, I had 7 opposing counsels on that one case, and we changed direction many times. But one of the most difficult things in that case was also in the lower court. The discovery issues are very difficult in family matters. Whoever leaves the house or gets kicked out doesn't have access to the historical documentation. And I don't care how many times the judge says, turn it over, turn it over, turn it over. If they're not gonna, they're just not gonna. And so that makes the case very difficult. And just when you think you got it, the United States Supreme Court comes down with a case that changes direction. So that was probably one of the most difficult ones I had to deal with the US Supreme Court case, the federal law dealing with military retirement, and then everything that's happening in these poor people's lives. And I did the best I could. That's what I did about it.
Thank you. Okay, Sophie Cooper.
For me, the most difficult cases in general are cases where there's serious physical injury or death, and I have a client that can't provide a lot of information for a variety of reasons. So one case that comes to mind, I had a case where a young lady had been strangled. She didn't die, but she suffered a stroke. The medical records indicated that she was a drug user. If my memory's right, it was meth. And sometimes meth can contribute to strokes. The story from her, I believe before she went to the hospital, because sometimes the effects of strangulation are delayed a little bit, and the person can talk and verbalize to the police officer, but they may not really be all there, even though they sound that way, was that a particular person had choked her with one hand. But upon more closely looking at the scientific evidence in the case, the photos, and I believe the lapels and pictures at the hospital, she had very clear markings on her neck. So I had to find an expert that could educate me about strangulation. And it was his opinion that it was a ligature, like a scarf or something like that, that was used to strangle. Well, the police had failed to collect any evidence whatsoever at the scene. But luckily, so I have to be creative. You look at the lapel. I always go into a case with an open mind and hopefully a creative thought. And you look at that lapel for what could it be? And then there was a conflict between police officers. Through the discovery process, I determined that I believe a sergeant or a supervising officer had told someone to go back, one of the officers, go back to the scene and look for some things. But that didn't happen. So ultimately, I had to file a lot of motions in order to get that case in the right posture. One of the motions was a motion to suppress evidence or exclude evidence because of the police failure to collect evidence. That's a very difficult motion to win. I won that motion, and then the pieces fell in place. And the scary part was that my client, I believe he had an alcohol problem. He really couldn't tell me a lot about what happened. He didn't think he did it, but that's what I had to work with. So for me, because the consequences of injuring someone to the level of possibly being the cause of a stroke, the punishment for that would have been great. So it was a heavy burden, but anyway, I won the case.
Thank you. Okay, so I have a new question for the candidates for Court of Appeals Position 2. In making decisions as part of a panel of judges, what role does collegiality play, and how should judges approach disagreements as to the result or the discussion of particular issues and whether to issue a dissenting opinion? So starting with Judge Ray.
Thank you. I think collegiality has a big role to play. The Court of Appeals in particular sits in panels of 3, so 10 judges, and every decision is made in rotating panels of 3. And so you have to develop a relationship with all the members of your court and understand how they all operate in these different groups. And my experience so far has been that a conversation generally goes a long way, even before an official panel conference or before you're even really done. If you reach out as a participant or you reach out as an author, you identify something that could be controversial or it could be something not everybody might agree on and work it out, or at least identify what the issues might be in advance. That's been very helpful. I think that explaining very carefully to your panel and having either a detailed conversation or written conversation about the processes that you've gone through as the author to get to a certain place. I looked at this, I looked at this, I looked at this, and this is where I landed, is also very helpful to get everybody on the same page with where the case is going. I haven't yet written a dissent, but there's no reason that a dissent needs to be an emotional experience. It's a difference of opinion on how the law operates in the context of certain facts. So whether you decide to write a concurrence because you disagree about the analysis or a dissent because you disagree about the analysis and the outcome, it doesn't need to impact the relationship with colleagues, and the continued function of the court needs colleagues who can work together and who can talk together.
Thank you. Okay, Gertrude Lee.
Yes, I think it's a given that collegiality plays a big part in the decision-making of the judges. I haven't sat on any of these panels. I don't know what goes on behind closed doors, like a lot of the attorneys in this auditorium, and I'm sure online I've wondered what does go on behind these closed doors. But I think we've got good examples from our U.S. Supreme Court, the friendship that existed between Ruth Bader Ginsburg and Justice Scalia. They had completely different ways of viewing cases, and their judicial philosophy was on complete, different spectrums, but they were friends and colleagues, and they got along well and respected one another. I think one going into any sort of situation like that with respect for your colleague. And in my experience in working in high-pressure, difficult situations, when I was chief prosecutor, I walked into a situation where we had 5 people who could go to court in 11 different district courts across the Navajo Nation, which meant 5 of us were covering that entire area. I had to get a lot of input from people about how to recruit, how to retain, what needed to change, and there were a lot of disagreements. And lucky for me, I surrounded myself with people who I thought were smarter than me and knew a lot, and I took what they had into consideration rather than booting them if they disagreed with me or thought that they were trying to undermine me. I think there's a way. I think it's helpful when people challenge you, especially when you disagree, and if in the end you can come together in mutual respect and go to a decision that is fair and just. That's the ultimate goal.
Thank you. Okay, and Stephen Curtis.
I'm not clear what the question was. Could you repeat it, please?
Yes, definitely. In making decisions as part of a panel of judges, what role does collegiality play? And how should judges approach disagreements as to the result or the discussion of particular issues and whether to issue a dissenting opinion?
I'm sorry. I guess I can't hear completely either. If you could speak up a little bit.
Yes, definitely. Okay. In making decisions as part of a panel of judges, what role does collegiality play? And how should judges approach disagreements as to the result or the discussion of particular issues and whether to issue a dissenting opinion?
Okay. Well, of course, I've not been on the court, but I can't imagine how you could be on the court and practice in that situation with your fellow judges and not be friendly and collegial about it and discuss the cases and your ideas, and I think you just have to be open and honest about your perspective and bring your best argument to your fellow judges, and trust that they're going to do the same thing. And I think that ought to be encouraged by all the courts and every judge on the courts.
Thank you. Okay, so the next question is for the candidates for Supreme Court Position 1. The Supreme Court's decisions establish legal precedents that must be followed by lower courts and in subsequent cases unless the Supreme Court overrules or modifies the precedent in a subsequent decision. How do you or would you approach the task of following or departing from existing precedents? And what factors would you take into consideration if you had to decide whether to overrule one of the court's previous decisions? So starting with Justice Vargas.
Thank you, Rosalind. You know, fortunately, we have a guide for this, and it is stare decisis. When we get a case that where one of the parties asks us to overrule a previous decision or a decision of the Court of Appeals, we look to stare decisis. And when we look at that, we consider whether the existing rule is unworkable under the current situation, whether the rule is so deep-rooted in our legal culture that undoing it would create a hardship. That's another factor that we consider. We look at whether the way that the rule has been used or not used, whether it's been abandoned. In that instance, we may decide that we're going to overrule that particular case. We also look at whether the facts have changed such that we need to consider a different rule. So those are generally the four factors that we look at to determine whether we should overturn a prior decision of this court or a decision of the Court of Appeals. There are instances where we get a decision of the Court of Appeals that we are looking at, it's an older decision, and we're looking at in the first instance, and we just decide that it's not correctly decided, and we will overrule that kind of a decision. That came up in the last couple of years in the Bridgestone subject matter jurisdiction cases that we ruled on, I think about a year and a half ago. But generally, we will stick to the principles of stare decisis in deciding whether we're going to overrule a case.
Thank you. Okay, and Tom Montoya.
Thank you. It looks like the question, which is a very good one, was prompted by the Dobbs decision, where the United States Supreme Court had the decision to make whether to apply former law or to overturn it. But we are not the U.S. Supreme Court. With respect to the New Mexico Supreme Court, to override a previous clear precedent would be rare. That wouldn't happen too often. But I actually was involved in a case where that essentially happened. And what the Supreme Court did was decide that a previous case was improperly decided, but in the way that the question was not actually presented that was decided. And so the Supreme Court retreated, used that word, from the prior Supreme Court case and essentially overruled it. And it was an important principle. It was a retirement case. I happened to be on the winning side of that one. But I'm going to quickly say what I was taught by Justice Harry Stowers, who was a former Chief Justice of the Supreme Court. And I asked him after I knew him well, and I asked him after he retired, tell me what's the most significant thing you can tell me about your tenure on the Supreme Court. And what he said was, a bad decision will not stand. That's what he said.
Thank you. Okay, and our last question is for Justice Zamora alone. Given that an elected judge must face periodic retention elections, How do you approach cases where the correct decision may be unpopular with a substantial segment of the public?
I'm going to do what I've done for almost 14 years, which is to follow the oath of office, which is to apply the law and uphold the Constitution. Our ethics rules require that we not make decisions based on a fear of criticism or fear that the public might disagree with our decision. So I'm going to keep doing what I've been doing and adhere to my oath of office.
Thank you. Okay, and I'm just checking the time. I don't think we have enough time to go back through. So why don't we just everyone can have 1 to 2 minutes again to just share any final thoughts they have with everyone who's here today. And let's start with Judge Baca.
Well, thank you very much again to the State Bar and the Appellate Practice section of the Bar for hosting and putting on this forum. I think it serves an important function in informing the members of the bar as well as members of the public who are attending here in person as well as online about the people who are sitting here and asking to serve you as your judges on the Court of Appeals and the Supreme Court. In my case, I think I've demonstrated tonight and also throughout the campaign that I have the knowledge, experience, and temperament to be a judge. I think I've proven that over the last 10 years, serving as a district court judge, and now for over a year as a Court of Appeals judge. As I said at the beginning, I come from a rural area like Ms. Lee, from northeastern New Mexico, Mora, San Miguel County, come from educators and ranchers, hardworking people who've invested in me or instilled in me the values of hard work and the fact that your word is your bond. And I've taken that and followed that through to get to where I am today. But I didn't do it by myself. It took, as has been said, a village to make me who I am. And I've been influenced by many people in my lives, and I think for the better, from all walks of life. And I want to bring that experience, that knowledge to the court, to be able to apply it so that our judiciary, and my focus being the Court of Appeals, that the Court of Appeals is a better court because I'm there working hard, bringing my experience, my influences to the court, and hopefully being able, as Judge Ray said, to get people answers in an efficient and fair manner, because that's the bottom line. We need to get the litigants the answers they seek, and they shouldn't be made to wait beyond a reasonable amount of time to get those answers. And so I appreciate, again, the bar and just people attending and listening and considering me. And I hope that they see, after I've been vetted by the Judicial Nominating Commission 3 times, by 3 different governors, and appointed by 3 different governors of both parties to judicial positions, that you can trust me to be a member of the Court of Appeals. Thank you.
Thank you. And Barbara Johnson.
Thank you, ma'am. What I'd like to say is I kind of went back through the Court of Appeals judges. I didn't find many family law practitioners that had gone up to the Court of Appeals. I think because family law is such a broad practice, and you must learn things besides the law. The law is, of course, you have to know that, but you also have to learn about personal relationships. You have to learn about children's developmental stages. You have to learn about people's finances, real estate, everything that touches their lives when they're temporarily insane, and they're entitled to be, and help them deal with it, because that has been my practice for 34 years. I think I am very well suited to know what our citizens need to move their lives forward, even though they've been through a mess, to help them get through that mess. I've been down here in the trenches working with them. I want them to know that I care for their lives. I chose New Mexico to be the state to raise my children in, to do my practice, and I intend to stay here for the rest of my life, and I would like to serve the citizens. They've been very good to me and my family, and I would like to give something back to them in the form of my good, hard work ethic and my desire to serve. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, Sophie Cooper.
I'm 71 years old. I've had a lot of life experience, and I've been thinking about things a lot. We say that old people have wisdom. I always say, well, in some ways, we're not as smart as we were when we were young. We can't learn new things always as fast. But what we have is we've seen the outcome of different approaches that we've taken to different problems throughout our life. In the same way, we see the outcome of different decisions that have come from the courts and how it's affected people. So I think that's a plus for me. I'm a resilient person. 2008, I lost the light of my life we were hit by a drunk driver near Hogback, New Mexico. I had to build my life up again, and I learned a lot about what it takes to keep your life going and the value of life. And it's a gift to me, that I survived it and that I continued with my practice of law and with my family life. So I'm proud of myself. I'm a hardworking person, and I don't burn out. I hear lots of lawyers talk about how they're burned out. They can't stand to go to the office in the morning. For me, I never had a day like that. I worked hard as a public defender for the state until my very last day, and I work hard at Isleta. So with me, you're going to get someone that's a hard worker, who's resilient, who's wise, who has a lot of life experience. I'm a good listener. I don't get angry when I hear the other side. I hear the other side every day in court from the prosecution. I'm creative, and I think I'm going to make a good judge. So thank you.
Thank you. Okay, Judge Ray.
Sorry. We've become very close up here. I've worked very hard at a lot of different kinds of things to be ready and to do a good job on the Court of Appeals. I am committed to doing that work, to writing these opinions, to reviewing these records, to witnessing what happened in the district court and in the administrative agencies and all these places, to make sure that everyone had a shot at justice, that you have a real access to your constitutional right to an appeal from whatever happened. This is what I've always wanted to do. I'm so happy here doing it, being a good colleague, being a good mentor, and being a good role model. And I'm excited by the opportunities and the hope for the future of New Mexico and the development of our law. I've always appreciated silence, just to give myself a second to think. So, and for those reasons, I would ask for your vote to remain a judge on the Court of Appeals.
Thank you. Okay, Gertrude Lee.
Thank you. Well, if the good people of the state of New Mexico decide to vote for me, and if you good people decide to vote for me as well, my path to the bench would be unconventional. It's not something that when I went to law school was first and foremost in my mind. But as I've practiced for over 12 years in the trenches, as we heard before, in the district court, as a prosecutor in court every single day, I have a unique understanding of what is to be expected. And, as a trial attorney, you're always looking at the far end of the picture. How is this going to look on appeal? How will these issues be in place? So I feel like in a way that it's constantly there as a trial attorney, making your record and preserving it. And I think that I would bring something unique, and I'm excited to do that. to bring that perspective to the Court of Appeals. And for anybody who might be wondering, I didn't finish my story before about how understaffed we were in Navajo Nation. By the time that my appointment ended, we had filled all the offices on the Navajo Nation. I had brought in a bunch of grant money to get victim advocates, and we were in a really, really strong place. And I had a blast recruiting and building up that system and training people. And I've heard from other people, not here tonight, but previously we've had discussions that the Court of Appeals is a workhorse. That's where the majority of the appeals go, and you've got to crank through decisions, and you've got to make sure that these decisions are fair and just, and that everybody gets a fair shake, basically, before the court. And I think that I would be an excellent addition to the court to do that, because I am a workhorse. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, Stephen Curtis.
If I'm elected to the Court of Appeals, I will bring a different perspective to the court. The court now, I think, is composed of mostly Democrats, has been for some time. But I think a different perspective is appropriate and useful. And I would focus on the personal and economic freedoms that has made this country what it is. Those were made possible by the Bill of Rights and the Constitution. And it's those economic and personal freedoms that made this country successful. And we have lifted more people out of poverty than anyone else in the world because of our system. And I think that system needs to be supported, and it needs to be advocated for more strongly than it has been. Just one example. We just got done with mask mandates. Now, first, ask yourself, have you seen the word mandate in the Constitution? I don't see it, right? But these things were imposed on people. It attacked our personal and economic freedoms. And 2 years later, now we're finding out with the studies from Johns Hopkins and other places, the masks didn't do anything to stop the spread of this virus. And yet, we went through it. And we were one of the last states to get rid of the mask mandate. Well, I think that needs to be changed. The perspective needs to be changed. And I will work as hard as possible to protect everyone's civil rights, personal rights, and economic freedoms. I ask for your vote for the Court of Appeals.
Thank you. Okay, Justice Vargas.
Thank you, Rosalind. It's been the honor of my lifetime to serve all of you as a justice on the New Mexico Supreme Court. Ms. Lee talked about making your record and how important it is to make your record. I hope that today I've made my record to show you that I have the experience and the qualifications to continue on with my position on the Supreme Court. By my service on the Supreme Court for the last 2 years, by my service on the Court of Appeals for the 4 years before that, with my 23-year legal career here in Albuquerque, and with all the work I've done to improve our legal system through the Ethics Advisory Committee, the State Bar, and the Disciplinary Board. I'd like to continue to do this work. I'd like to continue to work to improve access to our courts for our fellow New Mexicans who have so many struggles every day, and we want to make sure that having to come to court is not one of them. I want to continue to work with Justice Zamora to improve the availability of mental and behavioral health services to people who come before the court and need our help. I humbly ask for your vote to continue on the Supreme Court so that I can continue this work. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, Tom Montoya.
I very much appreciate your time and attention. In closing, a bit more personal and then professional and something aspirational. So my own family, I've been married 35 years, still married once, and I have 2 men now, both lawyers, and My wife homeschooled them. They both are brilliant, very successful. I'm going to depend upon them because they challenge me. They are a whole lot smarter than I am, and they have very good legal minds. And they give me cases, and they give me principles, and they help me quite a bit. I have been a member of the American Law Institute for 23 years. I'm about to become a lifetime member. Now, certainly the appellate section knows the institution that does the restatement of the law. And in my tenure, these are just some of the titles that we've done. These are restatements: torts, property, trusts, agency, intellectual property, software, wills, restitution, unjust enrichment, employment, liability insurance, model penal code. Those are just some of they're very steep in the law, and it covers all aspects of the law. The biggest issue in our state that we've been hearing is crime, and I understand the position of the victims because I was on the Crime Victims Reparation Commission for nearly 8 years, so I understand that. And finally, in 41 years, so many people ask me, well, when are you going to retire? And I always have the same answer. I said, what are you talking about? I am retired. What do you get to do when you retire? You get to do what you want. This is what I want. I want to be on the New Mexico Supreme Court. Please vote for me. I respect you. Thank you.
Thank you. And finally, Justice Zamora.
Thank you so much for the opportunity to speak with you. I'm actually going to completely change what I was going to say since I'm the only one here. You didn't ask us, but one of the questions was what character traits are essential to being an effective judge? I think I possess 3, and I think they're essential to being an effective judge. Integrity. I feel like I have served New Mexico with honesty, and no matter who you are or where you come from, if you've entered my courtroom or you filed a brief when I was on the Court of Appeals or Supreme Court, you've been treated fairly and you've been treated with dignity and respect. I believe courage is extremely important. The courage to do the right thing, to follow the law, and to always take your oath of office seriously. And I think experience matters. I've authored opinions in every area of the law. I've been a trial court judge for a decade, and I've been recommended and nominated each and every time I've submitted my name to the Judicial Nominating Commission. That's been for 3 different courts in front of 3 different governors from 2 different political parties. And lastly, if I get to continue on this court, the thing that has really been important to me was the Mental Health Commission that I was able to start. And the goals of that commission, and I will tell you that there were over 50 people that applied from all areas. We talk about going out into the communities and educating our public. We had behavioral health specialists from all over the state. We had every branch of government. We had law enforcement, DAs, PDs from all over the state with a similar goal, and that's to end the stigma associated with getting mental health treatment in this country. That is public safety, ways that we can improve resources to make sure that our community is safe. And lastly, something that's near and dear to my heart as a mom and a community member is making sure the youth in this state have the resources and behavioral health they need. I want to continue working for you. I love my job, and I am determined to make a dent in this issue of behavioral health in our justice system. My name's Brianna Zamora. I ask for your vote and for your support. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, well, thank you again to all of our candidates for being here tonight, and thank you for coming. And that's it. Have a good night.